Harry Saunders stared moodily into his pint, trying to figure out exactly when his life had gone down the crapper. Wasn't easy. Seemed for as long as he could remember, everything he touched turned to shit. Wasn't that he was an unpleasant kind of guy? Sure, he could get rowdy after a few drinks. There was that one time that he'd been caught stealing from some tourist from up country. But who gave a tin shit? It wasn't anyone from the village, just some rich prick, probably from London way. Some guy with a flashy car, a summer home in Barbados. What was the loss of one mobile phone to a rich prick like that? He'd been caught lifting the phone from the man's back pocket, but the thing that had really hurt was it had been one of his fellow villagers that had grassed him in. Old Maureen from the village fudge shop, calling out a warning in her old, warbling, cracked voice. The man had spun around, clamping a large, hairy hand on Harry's wrist. Harry had not tried to run or struggle to get away. What was the point? There must have been about 100 people milling about the village square that day, and he knew his goose was pretty much cooked. For that little stunt, he'd received a 500-pound fine and 100 hours of community service. That had been about 2 years ago now. He was still paying off the goddamn fine. At £2 a month, he figured he would just about be finished paying around the time Jesus returned to forgive him the sins of stealing in the first place. Fucking village. They hated the summer people just as much as he did. Behind their smiles was a smoldering contempt. But they hid it well. Desperate for the money those rich pricks brought down with them. They were like squirrels, storing their nuts to help them get through the long winters when the seas were high and the fishing lean. He was rudely dragged back from his musings by the clanging of the bar's bell. Big Eddie, the lantern's landlord, had called last orders and looked directly at Harry. He tipped his elbow a few times. The universal sign to drink up, and in Harry's case, to fuck off. Harry smirked and went back to contemplating the dregs of his pint. He knew damn well they had a lock-in at the lantern most nights. Old Eddie over there, he of the tipping elbow, would lock the doors, close the curtains, and keep the party going to the wee early hours of the morning. Of course, Harry wasn't invited. Not that it mattered. He had drunk away this month's welfare check at an alarming rate, and had just enough money left to keep the electric meter running until November's check arrived. Hot and crisp and rare to be drunk or smoked away. He stood, just about to leave, then his old chum, Johnny Callum, came barging through the door, rubbing his hands briskly. He glanced over at Harry, then quickly hurried over to the bar, hoping to get a drink, but Big Eddie sent him packing with a wave of one meaty arm. Shrugging, he weaved his way over to Harry's table and plonked himself down. The smell of marijuana surrounded him like a cloud. "How's it going, Harry?" he grinned, the smile of the perpetually stoned. "All right," Harry said, squinting at his old friend, fellow black sheep, although it hadn't always been that way for poor old Johnny. He'd been someone once, a university graduate. He had studied in London and got himself a degree in the business studies. His mistake had been coming back to the village. He had planned to take a year off before hunting down a job in the big city, a little time to recuperate after the traumas of university life. So had returned to the peace and tranquility of his childhood home, only to run into his childhood friend, Harry Saunders, who introduced him to the magical world of drugs and hard liquor. Now, just like Harry, he was a nobody. A well-educated nobody, but a nobody nonetheless. "Van Dravens." "What?" Harry muttered. "I saw the Van Dravens," Johnny repeated. "Jesus, Harry, how much have you had?" Harry waved that away. "What about the Van Draven house?" "I never said the house. There's nothing in that old place but broken furniture and bad dreams. Nothing we could sell anyway." "Sell?" Harry said, sitting up straighter, trying to clear away the fog. "Sell? What the hell are you talking about? This had better not be one of your get-rich-quick schemes. I don't fancy any more goddamn community service picking up litter and used needles. Once was enough." No, nothing like that," Johnny said, a strange gleam in his eye. "This is even better. You've heard of the Van Dravens, Harry. You know their story." "Of course I do," Harry answered. growing somewhat impatient. Everybody knows about the Van Draven house and the Westerfield family, found dead up there, bodies all torn up in the basement. It was the talk of the town when I was growing up. Never found the people responsible. Far as I know, the place has been empty ever since. So the old timers say the place is cursed. I'm quite sure it is, Johnny interrupted, and was long before the Westerfield family ever moved in. Now tell me, Harry, what do you know of Lucas Van Draven? Not much, Harry shrugged. He was the man who built the house back sometime in the 1800s. Killed his wife, a whole bunch of servants before throwing himself off a nearby cliff. Ever since, the place is rumored to be haunted. Now, are you going to tell me what the hell the Van Draven house has to do with any of this? The house, nothing. Lucas Van Draven, everything. That and the place he was buried. Harry threw up his hands. If you don't start making sense soon, Johnny, I'm going to punch you right in the nose. I swear to God. Okay. Johnny giggled, holding up a restraining hand. But it won't make sense unless you tell it my way. And old Eddie over there is giving me the stink eyes. Come on, let's go to the ship. Helen's working on the bar tonight. I know she has the hots for me, he said, wiggling his eyebrows suggestively. That's disgusting. Harry grinned, clambering up to his feet. She's old enough to be your mother. Grandmother, Johnny laughed, also rising. But what a set of tits. Laughing, both men left the lantern, Big Eddie's scowl following them out into the darkness. 10 minutes later, they were sat by a roaring fire in a quiet corner of the ship inn. Just like Johnny said, they had no problem getting served by the matronly barmaid, who seemed overjoyed to see Johnny and chattered away enthusiastically as she poured them both pints, making sure her ample bosom was on display the whole time. Finally, they escaped into a quiet corner and Johnny continued with his story. You remember my grandmother? Of course, Harry replied. We buried her only a few months ago. I mean, I was there at the funeral, wasn't I? Or have you forgotten? Johnny ignored that. What you didn't know was that her mother, my great-grandmother, used to work at the Van Draven house. So? Harry shrugged. What does that got to do with anything? She was a maid. Cleaner used to go up there twice a week, clean the place, polish the silver, turn the rugs, that kind of thing. She was the first one to find them, or what was left of them, after Lucas Van Draven had finished with them. Who? Harry asked, showing the first real spark of interest. Who did she find? His wife and her maid, all torn up on the sewing room floor. My old granny used to tell me tales when she had a few drinks, how her old mother had found them there, naked as babies, covered in blood, surrounded by black candles. His wife, Elizabeth Van Draven, she'd been stabbed to death with a pair of knitting needles to the throat. But it was her maid, Matilda, who got the worst. Her poor baby had been torn to shreds, where she lay on the floor, her stomach a red ruin, her blood spattered all over the walls. And later, when the house was more thoroughly inspected, there was talk of voodoo and bloody altars found in the basement, talk of human sacrifice, dark gods. Now, 2 days later, Lucas Van Draven's body was washed ashore, crushed to his chest, a child. Or at least something resembling one. But nothing normal, a freak, an aberration. Yet even in death, Lucas Van Draven clung to it. Both of them were hurried away and quickly buried in the Van Draven crypt in the ground of St. Peter's, and neither of them were ever spoken of again, at least not in polite society. And my old grandmother was not a member of any aristocracy or polite society. She was common folk. She liked to talk, especially when the drink was upon her. She told how her mother had found the bodies, then ran screaming from that house like all the demons of hell were snapping at her heel. Now what she failed to mention, however, was her theft. Scared to death she was, yet the glint of gold had stopped her in her tracks. Gold? Harry said, leaning more fully forward, the light from the flickering fire casting shadows across his face. What gold? A pocket watch, taken from Lucas Van Draven's study. Silver letter opener and a few other minor trifles. Whatever she could stuff in her apron pockets, I imagine. Oh, Harry said, leaning back a little disappointed. And this? Harry said, reaching into his coat pocket and placing an old, tatty-looking leather-bound book on the table between them. What is it? He drained off the last of his pint while glancing over at the clock on the far wall. It was getting late, and to be honest, he was getting tired of the whole affair. It's his journal, Harry said, picking up the book and caressing it greedily. Well, part of it anyway. Talk about his adventures in faraway lands, or at least starts off that way. Second half is a list, an inventory of things brought from his old house in London to his new home here in Mavagezi. The Van Draven house, Harry said, interested once again despite himself. Yeah, Harry said, seeming to grow even more excited as he flicked to the back of the book, reading the very last page, before thrusting the book at Harry. There, on the last page. Do you see it? Harry did not need his old friend to point it out to him. The yellowed page contained a list written in Lucas Van Draven's large copperplate handwriting. The list was written completely in faded black ink, all except one word written in block capitals and in faded red ink. The word read, Necronomicon. What the hell is a Necronomicon? Harry asked, passing the old book back to Johnny. It's a book, Harry. Very rare book. One of a kind. Written over 1,000 years ago by a madman poet named Abdul al-Hazad. Some say that he was possessed by the devil. The book contains dark rituals, writings on how to summon demons and other things beyond man's understanding. The book was banned all over the world before it disappeared completely. And you think that Lucas Van Draven had this book? Harry snorted. Yeah. He was a merchant seaman who owned a great fleet of ships that bartered and traded all over the world. Besides, it is written right there in his own journal, one Necronomicon. God knows if he knew what he had and whether it was connected to the deaths up at that old house. But Harry, don't you understand? If we could get our hands on it, it would make us rich beyond our wildest dreams. And you think it's here, Johnny? Harry laughed. Here, in this pissant little village, hidden away somewhere in that old house. No, Harry, I don't. I think it's in the Van Draven crypt. I think either the good folk of this village buried it with him to be rid of the evil, or he put it there himself to hide it from the rest of the world. And why do you think that? Harry asked, playing with his empty glass. Because of this, Johnny said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a piece of crumpled paper, which he unfolded and smoothed out across the table, revealing 3 rough sketches. Do you recognize any of these, Harry? Harry had a hard look at all 3 pictures. One was a book, the cover bound with what looked like a heavy leather with thick, rough stitching. The shape and pattern reminded him of a screaming man's face, or perhaps it was merely a trick of the light. The other 2 pictures were exactly the same, and Harry felt a familiar stirring at the sight of them. The first must be a picture of this Necronomicon thingy, Harry said, musing it over. The other 2 look familiar, but I ain't quite sure. You're right. This is a rough sketch of the Necronomicon. The other 2 are the coat of arms of the Van Draven family. One I sketched while looking at the statues of those god-awful lions that guard the porch of the house. The coat of arms is emblazed across their chest, and the other one I sketched from the Van Draven crypt. See the difference, Harry? Harry looked hard. The Van Draven coat of arms was that of a 3-sailed clipper ship, riding a huge wave. An eagle's sword overhead, a struggling fish clasped firmly in its talons, or at least it was in one of the drawings. In the other, the eagle did not clasp a fish, but a book. A book that seemed to have a screaming face as a cover. Harry gasped. You found this one on his tomb, didn't you? Up there at his old crypt? Yeah, Johnny said, glancing around nervously at the nearly empty pub. For Christ's sake, don't keep your voice down, Harry. Sorry, Harry said, looking around guiltily before carrying on in a quieter tone. You really think it's up there, Johnny? Yeah, I do, Johnny said, leaning forward until their noses were almost touching. I think Lucas Van Draven built that crypt. Not only to be interred there one day, but also to hide his greatest treasures. God knows what could be buried up there, Harry. Not just the book, but gold, jewels. There has been talk of a pirate's treasure circulating around the village for years. God knows what a man like Lucas Van Draven got up to there at sea. So what do you think? Want to go take a look? Yes, Harry said immediately, his imagination soaring at the thoughts of such wealth. Good man, Johnny said, patting him on the shoulder. Now just don't you worry about a thing, Harry. I have a plan. Johnny's great and wonderful plan consisted of sneaking into his elderly mom and dad's garden shed to pick up a few rusty tools before storing them in the back of his equally rusted van. He then stole into the house, grabbed up a high-powered torch from under his sink, and a bottle of his dad's best brandy from the liquor cabinet. He thrust both into Harry's lap before gently turning on the ignition and pulling out of the drive, heading to St. Peter's Cemetery. Harry looked at his watch as they drove through the silent streets of Mevagissey. It was 1 a.m. Nobody's stirring. Not even a mouse. What's that, Harry? Johnny asked, passing him the bottle. Nothing, Harry grunted, taking a long pull of brandy. Let's just get this done. Not having second thoughts, are you, Harry? No. Are you? Of course not, Johnny said, squirming under Harry's bloodshot gaze. Just all seems a little more real in the dark. Harry laughed, taking another long drink. He could feel the brandy warming him all the way to his toes. Old Johnny Callum, scared of the dark. Johnny didn't answer, just nodded his head at the window screen as he pulled his old van to a gentle stop before the cemetery gates. Here we are, he sighed. Yeah, I guess we are. You know, if we get caught, we could get in a lot of trouble for this. And who's going to catch us? Johnny said, snatching the bottle from Harry and gulping the fiery brandy down. When was the last time you even saw a real policeman in Mevagissey? Oh, sure, we have that tosspot Andy Clutterbuck, but old Clutterfuck couldn't find his asshole with 2 hands and a flashlight. Come on, he said, climbing out of the van. In and out before you know it. Okay, Harry said, pulling his coat closed against the cold night air. Let's get this done. The first obstacle the two men came across was the cemetery gate. Harry had never known them to be locked. The cemetery itself had not been in use for at least 60 years, and dated back as far as the 1600s. People came here all the time to take charcoal rubbings of the old stones. Harry had even done it himself as a child, and had never seen the old gates so much as closed, never mind locked, but here he was looking at the world's oldest and rustiest padlock. Not to worry, Johnny said, fetching the tools from the back of the van. Have it all covered. That said, he picked out a pair of large-looking bolt cutters, somewhat shinier than the rest. Came prepared, did you? Harry said, shining the flashlight on the old rusty lock. Always best to do your homework, Johnny replied, bearing down, his back hunched. After a couple of seconds, there was an audible sink as the two blades came together and sheared the clasp in half, and sending the flaking old lock tumbling to the ground. There we go, Johnny said, kicking the lock to one side. Give me the flashlight, Harry. Follow me. I know where it is. Stay close. Place is in shite state. Bits of broken headstone all over the place. Vines, potholes in the path. Yeah, Harry replied, his breath steaming in the air. I've been here before, you know. That's the spirit, Harry, Johnny said, turning his back and heading into the darkness. Only a few more steps between us and a fortune. The cemetery was pretty much just how Harry had imagined it would be. Scary as hell. Everywhere there were little noises. The wind sighing through the trees, the rusting of autumn leaves, small creatures scurried away through the long grass, scared off by the human interlopers. Shadows cast by the faraway streetlights danced and crawled over the leaning, broken headstones, and stone angels seemed to turn to watch them as they passed. Suddenly, Johnny stopped, causing Harry to crash into the back of him, dropping the tool bag to the floor with a resounding crash. The fuck? Johnny rounded. You trying to wake up the whole fucking village? Well, if you hadn't just fucking stopped... Well, if you weren't breathing down my goddamn neck, how the hell am I supposed to see anything? Harry replied, scooping up the tools. You're the one with the goddamn flashlight. Okay. Let's not wake up the whole village. We're nearly there now. It's up here, he said once again, taking the lead. Just up past these trees. Harry had seen the Van Draven crypt before, but never in the dark. Now as Johnny played his torch over it, Harry seemed to remember every wild-eyed tale he'd ever been told of Lucas Van Draven and his terrible house. Impressive, isn't it? Johnny said, running a gloved hand down a white marble pillar. I don't know what it is, Harry said, taking in the structure. Looks like a mix between some old church and one of those Roman temples they always show on the History Channel. It's too big, Johnny said, running his torchlight down the length of the building. See how it runs back into the hillside there. So tell me, Harry, why would a man like Lucas Van Draven, with no living family, a man alone in the world except for his wife and a few servants, build a mausoleum as big as this? Because he was a rich prick, Harry snorted. And even in death, he wanted people to know it. Or he's using it to hide something. Maybe a mix of things. And there's this. Look here, Harry. Just like I told you. Do you see it? Harry came forward to the tomb's entrance, which was flanked on either side by tall, marble angels. Each one carried an upraised sword, and the crest of Van Draven was blazoned across their shields. Do you see it, Harry? Johnny said excitedly. Do you see it? I see it, Harry replied. Just like you said. A book clasped in eagle's claws, not a fish like up at the house. It's here, Harry. I bet my life upon it. You may well have to, Harry replied roughly, handing him the bolt cutters. If there's nothing in there, I'm going to have to bash your skull in with this spade and leave you here. After all, it's plenty of space. Johnny laughed nervously and set about breaking off the old padlock from the thick wrought iron gates. He needn't have bothered. He barely touched the thing when it fell off to the floor in a shower of rust. Well, that was easy. Johnny shrugged. Now comes the hard part. What do you think that door is made of, Harry? It's like copper. Thick, too. We certainly don't have a key to that lock. Let me guess, Harry said. You brought your lock-picking set? Even better, Harry said, taking the tool bag off Harry and placing it on the ground. He rummaged through it for a moment before climbing to his feet, a portable butane torch in his hand. Holy shit, what the hell are you going to do with that thing? Melt through the lock, of course. Copper's a soft metal. Shouldn't take long to soften the metal. Then we just give it a knock with a good old hammer and should pop right out. Just like that, Harry said doubtfully. Have a little faith in your old pal, Johnny said, kneeling down. He popped the flame on his lighter, then turned on the gas, and immediately a sharp blue flame sprang to life. Still smiling, he began to cut. The whole thing took a hell of a lot longer than Johnny had said. Copper may be soft, but it doesn't melt easy. After 2 hours of heating, then banging at the lock with a lump hammer, wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound, the lock finally gave way. By this point, both men were sweating profusely despite the cold, and Harry kept looking at his watch worrifully. It was now 3 o'clock in the morning. The effects of last night's booze were wearing off, and he was beginning to wonder what the hell he was doing up here in the first place. Okay, Johnny said, gathering up the tools. Let's finish this. Help me with the door, Harry. Together, both men put their shoulders to the heavy door and pushed. It gave way grudgingly with a loud creak that made both men wince and quickly look around before darting inside. What they saw inside stopped them in their tracks as their torchlight revealed the chaos within. Everywhere, there was broken stone and rotting plaster. In the corner was the remnants of a shattered coffin, a few bones scattered here and there. Johnny continued to slowly play his torchlight around the tomb, his mouth hanging open. In the center of the room lay another coffin. This one also had been smashed open, its contents heaved out onto the floor. A skeleton lay close by, dressed in the remains of a tattered dress. The skull was whole and surrounded by long, wispy hair. Long, drained of any color. It seemed to grin at them as if happy to see someone after so long alone in the dark. Mother of God, Harry whispered. Look there, he said, pointing at the back wall. Johnny dragged his eyes away from the grinning skull and shined his light where Harry's trembling finger was now pointed. What the hell? He gasped, not believing what he was seeing. At the back of the crypt was a huge hole. The concrete had somehow been blasted away, leaving a ragged hole surrounded by crumbling dirt and poking roots. "Son of a bitch," Johnny growled. "They stole it." "Who stole what?" Harry said, scurrying to keep up. "Grave robbers. Sons of bitches must have tunneled their way in and stolen everything inside." He suddenly came to an abrupt stop, his anger evaporating as shock took over him. He turned to look at Harry. "Look," he whispered, shining the torch with one trembling hand. Harry quickly looked over his shoulder. "Holy shit," he said. "What the hell's going on here, Johnny?" "I don't know," Johnny replied, staring at the stone steps that led down into the darkness. "I don't have a fucking clue." A full minute passed until either man spoke again. They just stood there trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "Okay," Johnny said, squaring his shoulders. "Let's head on down." "What?" Harry said, grabbing Johnny's arm. "What the hell are you talking about?" Johnny shrugged free and shined his torch in Harry's face. "I'm gonna go down to take a look. There's something hidden down there, Harry, and I intend to find it. Look at those steps. No grave robber built those, don't you get it? He hid it away, buried it down there maybe in some kind of cave complex he discovered while building the foundation for this place. It's down there, Harry. The Van Draven fortune. We can split it, Harry. You take the gold, the jewels, whatever we find. I take the book. Come on, Harry. We're close, can't you feel it?" And he could. There was something down there, almost as if it were calling to him. Perhaps his entire life had led to this moment. All of his failures left behind him. He'd be rich. Richer than his wildest dreams. And then he would show them who was a loser. He could see it now, them begging him for money, and the village girls who had snubbed him, calling him a waster. He could have them. He could have it all. And what was there to be afraid of? This is no Indiana Jones movie with a bunch of cheap booby traps. There was nothing down there but the dark and a fortune just waiting for Harry Saunders to go claim it. "All right," he said. "Lead the way." They had only been walking a few minutes, seemingly heading straight down, when the floor suddenly seemed to level off, forming a kind of tunnel. They staggered on the walls, getting narrower, their breathing loud in their ears. Harry was just about to demand to go back when they turned a final corner that opened into a small cave. Harry looked around in amazement. His jaw dropped as he let out a terrified groan. The cave was lit by some kind of glowing fungus that seemed to crawl and undulate with a strange life of its own. Strewn across the floor was the wealth of nations. Gold, doubloons, pearls, and jewels the size of hen's eggs. Rough bars of silver and gold trinkets lay scattered about. Amongst all these treasures, an obsidian altar rose in the center of the room. Upon it lay a large black book. It could only be the fabled Necronomicon. "Sweet God," Johnny muttered. "It's here, Harry. We actually found it." "No," Harry shouted, lurching at his friend. He span him about. "We have to leave this place, Johnny. We have to leave right now. Can't you feel it? This place is evil. We have to leave," he said again, half dragging his friend with him. "Leave?" Johnny shrugged him off angrily. "It's here, Harry. The book's right here. You can have the rest. Take it all. But the book's mine." "Help me." The voice was nothing more than a sibilant whisper, yet both men slowly turned in the direction from which it had come. With a trembling hand, Johnny raised the torch and shined it on the back of the cavern-like room. There, slumped in a throne-like chair, sat a man, a creature that had once been a man. The thing wore the remains of a tattered suit, torn from the waist up. Clinging to its rotting frame was some kind of loathsome leech or parasite. As the two men looked on in horror, the thing tore a strip of rotting flesh from the creature's side, revealing yellowed ribs. Black blood oozed from the opening, and the creature let out a cry of agony as it stumbled to its feet, reaching out, imploring the two men. "Help me," it pleaded. "Help me feed it. It's hungry. Always hungry. Help me feed it. Help me feed my son." "No!" Harry screamed in denial. Turning, he fled into the darkened passage, Johnny right behind him. Even over Johnny's whimpering, Harry could hear it coming, hear it dragging its rotting body after them, trapped forever in its own version of hell. They were halfway up the stairs when there came a clattering from behind and a cry of pain. Harry spun around. Johnny was down, sprawled on the steps, his face a grimace of pain. "My ankle! Oh God, Harry, don't leave me here!" A pale arm shot out of the darkness and wrapped itself around Johnny's throat as the thing that had once been Lucas Van Draven pulled itself up onto his body, and for a moment, Johnny heaved and bucked, gagging and choking. Then his eyes rolled up in his head as he fainted dead away. Now there was only Harry, face to face with his terror from the dark. He scrambled backwards as the thing reached for him. "Come with me," it chuckled. "Down into the dark. Such things I will show you. Such sweet agonies. Come," it said, reaching, straining. "You will live forever." "No!" Harry screamed, scrambling to his feet. He turned and ran, bursting from the tunnels. He ran through the night-shrouded crypt out into the night. He fled, screaming, his mind broken. In the graveyard, all was still. An owl hooted in the wind, sighed through the trees. Overhead, a pale moon shone a silver light over the now silent tomb of Van Draven. Good evening once again, kids. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you for watching tonight's video, or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast that's available on Spotify, or on Apple Music, or on any other places that you can get podcasts. I'm not entirely sure where people listen to podcasts. If you guys are watching on YouTube, though, I would really appreciate if you click the subscribe button, click that thumbs up button, and hit the bell for me, because that's what we're supposed to say now. We're required by YouTube law. As always, I want to give a big thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. You guys are the real MVPs, and you allow us to get a whole bunch of custom stories that are only heard here on this channel, on this podcast. So, a very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Tristan Pelton, Chase Burnett, Diana Kraus, Maria Walker, Tonya Oran, Paingravy, Inactive Hermit, Austin Johnson, Crazy Kid, MrMarcusBlitz, Aika Limchoc, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Jabbles Raz, Voiceofsand, Coffee Zombie, Matthew McNeese, ChellyJay, Jeremy H, raltizal, PhycoMel, Nana, TheMorrigan, Nick Weaver, MeltedLake, Tali Sue, SkyMara Ravenswood, William King, Reaper 61167, Darth Miver, Micah Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Nessie, Parafa Panda, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Billy Morrow, Sashi Suzaku, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Miss Xander, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trey Smiles, and Corey Kenshin. And of course, everybody who's down there in the description as well, and everybody who can support on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta for even $1, I appreciate it greatly, and I'm sure that all the authors that we were able to work with appreciate it too. So, thank you guys so much, thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.